Welcome to the Mindful Fire podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast. My dad will be so grateful. See you next time on the Mindful Fire podcast.
Welcome to the Mindful Fire podcast, a show about crafting a life you love and making work optional, using the tools of mindfulness, envisioning, and financial independence. I'm your host, Adam Coelho, and I'm so glad you're here. Each episode of the Mindful Fire podcast explores these 3 tools through teachings, guided meditations, and inspiring interviews with people actually living them to craft a life they love. At its core, Mindful Fire is about creating more awareness and choice in your life. Mindfulness helps you develop self-awareness to know yourself better and what's most important to you by practicing a kind, curious awareness. Envisioning is all about choosing to think big about your life and putting the power of your predicting brain to work to create the life you dream of. And financial independence brings awareness and choice to your financial life, empowering you to make your vision a reality by getting your money sorted out and ultimately making work optional. And here's the best part. You don't have to wait until you reach financial independence to live out your vision. Mindful Fire is about using these tools to craft that life now on the path to financial independence and beyond. If you're ready to start your Mindful Fire journey, go to mindfulfire.org/start and download my free envisioning guide. In just 10 minutes, this guide will help you craft a clear and inspiring vision for your life. Again, you can download it for free at mindfulfire.org/start. Let's jump into today's episode. Newton, welcome to the Mindful Fire podcast. I'm so glad to have you here.
Adam, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here. I know we've been trying to make this happen for a while, so super excited it's actually happening.
Me too, man. I know we rescheduled a few times. We work at Google together, but we also met on LinkedIn, and I've been following your work and kind of your leadership journey on LinkedIn. It's been inspiring, and so I knew I wanted to have you on the podcast. So glad we're finally making it happen.
Yeah, I'm super happy to be here. I love the way that you combine the topics of, say, mindfulness, financial independence. And when we think about financial independence, all the things you got to get clear on in life. I was raised by immigrant parents, so I have deep money fears, just to be frank. And so what you speak to on your podcast, it heavily resonates.
I'm glad to hear it. I also have my own money fears and have an immigrant father as well. And I don't know if that plays a factor for me, but I certainly have been working through this myself. And that's a huge part of starting and doing this podcast. It's both to work through some of that, also create more options for myself, and then get clear on what do I actually want. I thought I wanted to be a mindfulness teacher. I started talking to mindfulness teachers through this podcast. I was like, maybe I don't want to do exactly that, so I'm figuring it out, working through those fears one at a time. So I'd love to have you start by sharing a little bit about who you are, your journey, and what you're up to in the world.
Sure. Taking a step back, I think of my life in these 3 major buckets. I'm a husband and father to 2 wonderful daughters. I'm a world champion competitive powerlifter. And then in my career, I'm a leader in this field of health and performance. And my day job is I'm director of health and performance at Google, where what I'm really trying to do is help the world create this culture of well-being that inspires people to take better care of themselves and each other. At Google, I oversee this suite of amenities, both on-site and digital, that help support the physical, mental, social, and spiritual health of our Google community. And so those things really work really well together. Now, the reason that I've been doing podcasts like this one is if I dial back to November 2021, and here I am, I'm climbing in this field of health and well-being, especially in the workplace. And now I have this opportunity to give a keynote at a Google Health and Wellbeing conference to all these industry experts and thought leaders. And so this is like a pinnacle moment for my career. I spent a bunch of weeks practicing and crafting and polishing this talk because I really want to nail it. But something felt off. where I was thinking I wanted to talk about the intersections of Google technology and health and well-being, but it felt like that was not on the mark. Eventually, about 3 days out, I had to be honest with myself and really think about like, well, what should we really be talking about? And I threw out my entire keynote and I started over. And instead, I got up there and I delivered a message around what was really going on, what I thought was really important. What was really going on was that I had long been struggling with depression and anxiety. I'd soon be going on mental health leave. And the reason I was telling them was that I knew from my job and from the external research how many were struggling just like me. And so if we were going to have an important conversation around health and well-being in the workplace, that's what we needed to talk about. And so I gave that talk, and then a month later, I went on mental health leave. And despite having 20 years of experience in health and well-being, despite being a world champion powerlifter and understanding how health and well-being and performance work together up to world champion levels, I still burned out. And if I'm honest about why I got there, the hard thing to say is that I ended up in a situation where I was ashamed of how I was showing up as a husband and father. I felt out of alignment with the things that I said were most valuable and highest priority to me. And going out on leave was an act of desperation because I didn't know what else to do. Now, to wrap up this story, what brings me here today is I came back in May 2022. And knowing that so many others were struggling and knowing that the stigma around mental health, especially in the workplace, is still so high, I said, I don't know how to solve this, but I got to try something different. I'm going to tell my story anywhere I'm invited to do so. I was invited onto a men's mental health podcast to tell my story. I thought it would be a one and done thing. But when I told that story and I posted it on LinkedIn in front of my professional network, it got 20 times the engagement of anything I had posted up until that point. And then the requests for more interviews, more talks, turning those talks into workshops just kept coming. So now it's been almost 2 years. And I've said, I'm going to keep telling my story. I'm going to keep telling people what I'd learned by telling my story as long as you give me the mic. And we're 2 years in. It only keeps accelerating. And so that's why I'm here today. I'm here to talk about not just that journey, but how it intersects with this world of mindfulness and financial freedom that you're laying out, because I've used a lot of those tools in trying to get clear on what I want.
That's awesome, man. I got goosebumps as we were telling that story. So, especially with regards to what you're saying about feeling ashamed of how you're showing up as a father and a husband, I'd love to understand more about that because that's been on my mind recently as well. It's kind of like I love the real talk, right? I love that you throughout your presentation that you showed up with what was real, right? Like how can you have a conversation about mental health and well-being and all of that when everyone's, a lot of the times at those places, like people are just pretending like everything is fine, but you went and you were super real. And I think that I can't help it. And like, that's how I show up on the podcast. That's how I show up when I facilitate workshops. And I think people really resonate with that. And I think 2 years of you being invited to speak is a perfect testament to that. I personally have been thinking a lot about, I'm this mindfulness guy and I'm, for lack of a better word, losing my shit with my kids about nothing.
I haven't found that magical dad who is not losing his shit with his kids once in a while. If you find them, let me know because I will follow them to the ends of the earth and they will be my guru, but I don't think they exist.
No, I don't think so. And I do love when I'm at like a birthday party and some dad's losing their shit with their kid. I'm like, not just.
Yes.
I'd love to hear more about how that came up for you, like what you actually did about it. Because like, I know all this stuff. I want to create space between stimulus and response with my kids. I want to show up, fully present in all this. And yet I feel like I'm coming up short in that way. And that feels terrible. Right. And times are passing. So would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I'll start with, I'll tell like a specific incident where that was one of them where I said, this is not working. I got to do something. And then I'll talk about how I've started to try to like look more internally to say like, hey, what is going on? Like, why are you losing your shit in these instances? And how can you think about this different or show up different? So this was around the time that I was about to give that keynote. And I had at that point been diagnosed with or assessed with major symptoms of depression and anxiety. Depression would come and go. Anxiety was just ever present. And I remember I think it was a morning, and we're in the kitchen. My daughter at that point is 4. We have music playing. We have the cats meowing, asking for food. We have my daughter who is alternatingly screaming, laughing, and singing. And I think I was probably trying to get something done on my phone. And then there was like just overwhelming mental chatter about all the things that I'm behind on and all the ways I'm failing. And at some point, I didn't know what to do. And so I just plugged my ears and just started saying, I'm sorry, could you please be quiet? Could you please be quiet? And I closed my eyes because I felt completely out of control. I just kept going, can you please be quiet? Can you please be quiet? And then eventually what I noticed was my daughter's voice stopped. And I opened my eyes and I look at her, and at a minimum, she's confused. My hope is she wasn't terrified by that. But now I see my daughter is like frozen, like, what is going on with dad? And that was one of the moments where I said, you know what? I have constructed this narrative where I tell myself, I'm working so hard for my family. But working so hard has resulted in me showing up this way with my daughter. And looking at her face, I have to ask, is this what's best for her? It was just a clear no. And so that was like one like really clear incident where it said, hey, you got to do something different. I was already thinking about going on leave, and that just reinforced, you got to go figure this out. So that's kind of like what it looked like. And there were variants of that for months.
No, I resonate with that so much. Every meal was basically that with me right now. But,
yes.
But to just, have that like loss of control. But it's just like, for me, it's like a feeling of like, I just want to run. I just want to run to my bed, put the covers over my head, and just wait till it figures itself out, which it will not.
Yes. The number of mornings that I would wake up and not be excited to get out of bed, like that I'd want to throw the covers over my head. Like it was getting close to 100%. That's like a specific story about how I was showing up. And as I went on leave, I had to do a lot of work on figuring out like, where's all that energy, that anxious energy coming from? I use this archetype, and this has landed really, really well, especially with, I'll say, audiences of high performing professionals, especially those from immigrant families. And I call this archetype that lives inside me, I just call it the monster. You know, if you are a fan of Carl Jung's psychology, like, you know about like the shadow. It's kind of like the shadow, except it's way more aggressive. And it's very dark and it's berating. It's telling you like, you are lazy. You got to get this done. You're going to fall behind. You're going to let the family down. You achieve something and it tells you, yeah, you got that done, but that was a fluke. You're not going to be able to maintain this. And it wasn't that big a deal. And so it just keeps going and going and going. And the hard part is, on the one hand, like, I've learned to just hate this voice. Like, I'm always fighting it. But then there's this uncomfortable sense that the voice, it is you. Like, it is part of you. So you now have this like weird tension of, I feel this monster inside me. It's telling me all these things because I am struggling like with all the things it's saying to me. I show up like even more anxious, like even more tense with my daughter and my loved ones. And then I have to acknowledge it's part of my software. Why is it in there? And so as I went on leave and I started to really do some work on myself, I had to think about, okay, what are these voices inside me? Where might they have come from? There's the monster, which was when I was in a bad place, was the really loud one. I hear the voice of my parents, and, you know, they also drove me pretty hard, but there was an undercurrent of love through everything they communicated to me. So it was more like the stern parent who is saying, you should work hard because we care about you and we want you to be safe and secure. And it was not so berating as the monster. I also feel I went through childhood bullying. I feel a lot of my childhood bully's voice in the monster. That childhood bully, they're long gone. They're grown. They've matured. They're different. So that bully doesn't exist anymore, but they left me with the monster. And then there's these other voices in me that I would call like There's the friend where I'm trying to be a friend to myself and be more positive. And then there's the coach who maybe helps me take a step back and says, how do you get through this moment? Like, how do you want to show up in this moment? It helps me reorient. The thing that I've had to do is to say, okay, I know the catalog of voices now, and I've categorized them so that I can keep clear who is who. I found this field of therapy called internal family systems. And versus some other fields where they say, oh, you need to get clear on your values and what's most important to you, and then integrate it all back into like one being. Internal family system says, no, you don't. You can have a whole team of voices in your head. You just need to make sure you're the boss of them, and they only show up when they work to your advantage. And other times you need to say, monster, no, get back in the cage. You don't get to talk to my kids. You will not show up at this meeting. And so once I could think about it that way, like it changed my relationship, where instead of trying to reject the monster, I said, okay, you are a really difficult but powerful teammate, and I got to be real clear about how you show up and how you do not show up. And so that's where I'm at today. Someday maybe the monster will be gone, but right now the monster still plays a prevalent role in the organization of Newton Cheng's brain. And so I'll make sure he has a clear job to do.
I love that. What kind of jobs do you give him?
I think the times where I've said, I need to get stuff done, and there's no one in my field of vision who might get hurt by this. Like, for example, training for competitive powerlifting, it takes a lot of drive. It takes a lot of commitment. And sometimes it's keep your emotions low. Just get the work done. Sometimes you got to say, get after it. Power through this. I don't care if that weight is big and scary and might crush you. Do it. And so sometimes I'm like, okay, monster, this is scaring me. I'm going to need you to kick my ass and get me through this workout. But at least I'm being intentional about it versus the monster sneaking out of his cage and the whole workout saying, you suck. Like, you are lazy. Get back under that bar.
Yeah. It's just the level of intentionality. Sounds like that's the big difference.
Huge, the awareness and the intentionality.
Got it. So it sounds like this internal family systems branch of therapy was very helpful to come to this place of understanding there's these different voices, and you can, as long as you're the conductor and in charge of them rather than running you, was very helpful.
Are you a Marvel fan?
A little bit, not too much.
Okay. Did you see the Avengers movies with the Incredible Hulk?
Yes.
Think of like before internal family systems, I only could fight the Hulk. Like the Hulk would show up and wreck everything. With internal family systems, it's more like by the end of the Avengers, the Hulk has become a team member where they can give him directions and say, Hulk, smash that.
Right.
That's how I use my monster now.
Got it. That's great. And how has that changed how you show up with your family and how you think about, that the thing that brought you to that point of needing to do something about it?
The thing, like if I think about conflict specifically with my daughter, I have two daughters. One is 6 and one is 21 months old. If I think about the conflict I have with the 6-year-old, it's a lot of, I can't get her to listen. The monster makes me interpret it as disrespect or some feeling of not being valued. And then the monster takes over my vocal cords and makes me raise my voice or get into like a blaming state with her. One thing that I learned from there's a transracial adoptive family organization called PACT. And so both my daughters are Black. And my wife and I were Asian. And so we joined this organization and go to their workshops to help understand the mental health and cultural difference journey of transracial adoption. And one acronym that a presenter there gave me that's been so useful is QTIP, QTIP. And that is quit taking it personally. And so my daughter, I ask her to do something and she yells at me. The monster like wants out of the cage instantly and is like, oh, hell no. Like, let me at her. And I have to start yelling Q-tip. And then it settles down. I'm like, okay, this is a 6-year-old trying to figure out how to regulate their own emotions, figure out what is socially acceptable, what is not. And also she wants something different than I do. That's totally human. Q-tip, quit taking it personally. And if I
Writing it
can
down
do
right now.
that, yeah, if I can rein that in, it just takes a split second, like Q-tip. Then I can be like, okay. And I can talk to her and say, okay, I hear you. We need to do this. Here's why. Can you please do that with me? And she will work through her own monster or grumbling. And then more often we get on the same page.
That's really helpful because it's actually really funny. I'm resonating with everything you're saying. And like you have a 6-year-old and a 21-month-old, and I have a 5-year-old and a 16-month-old. So that's like
okay.
pretty similar ages. I mean, I have 2 boys, but like what you're saying, like it feels like it's disrespect. And it's like, I just react. Like I'm not even aware of it. The way my wife starts like shushing me. And I'm like, of course I take that as disrespect as well. And the monster comes out for that. But it's like, I'm just like talking, like I'm naturally talking at a higher, like I'm reacting and I'm not even realizing it. And yeah, I realize some of this, a good amount of it comes from the way that I was parented. And, as you said, there was an undercurrent of love in my family as well. But it just, for me, it's like my internal dialogue is like, you're not good enough. You're doing it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and then I just hear myself saying this to my son constantly, just like criticizing everything he's doing, every which way. And I need to create some space and work on this, because it's not the way I want to be showing up. I don't want to pass this on to him to then continue the cycle of it.
It's so much like you're doing work on yourself so that you can do the already super difficult job of fatherhood. It's a lot.
It is. It's full on, as I say. When I tell people it's a full on, all in type of thing.
Can I offer one more positive insight or maybe not positive, but humorous insight that I came to? I was on another podcast. It was a powerlifting podcast, but all the other speakers, they were dads. And someone made a dad joke. It was like a pun. And then I came to this aha of, the reason that we are making dad jokes, that's a coping mechanism. Because if I don't keep things light, I'm going to lose my shit. So I better fire off on every low-hanging joke I can get. Otherwise, the monster is going to come out and this is going to go south. And every other dad like nodded their head or like, yep, that's exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah, exactly. Just taking the little moment of brevity to keep from losing it. Yeah, absolutely. We took a different direction, but I'm really glad we did because I think that a lot of people, especially parents, they're showing up in their life, they're trying to do their best and there are challenges. So I'm glad we covered that. But I'd love to understand how, before we started recording, you mentioned that you're starting to think a little bit differently about the place of work and specifically Google in your life. And I think a lot of people, especially on the fire path, are thinking about building wealth so that they can go and do something else rather than what they might be doing for work now. But that journey's a long journey, right? So I think that we really need to find a way to use this time that we're putting into work to learn and grow personally. And it sounds like you've been thinking a lot about how you relate to work. So maybe that's a good setup, maybe not. Would love to hear your thoughts on that whole thing and take it in any direction you want.
Yeah. So I'll be pretty open about how wrapped up I have been in my job at Google. And I'll dial back my journey of coming to Google and why I'm so emotionally wrapped up in it. Before I came to Google, I was actually an electrical engineer. I was working on the PlayStation 3 for a company that partnered with Sony. And it was really great intellectual challenges, but it just didn't feel like, hey, this is what I'm supposed to be doing in the world. And so I didn't have the awareness around mental health to know then, but I was clearly depressed and lonely. This was in my early to mid 20s. It's not a unique story for someone in their early and mid 20s to be depressed and lonely and confused about their place in the world. So I was going through that just like everyone else. But I found myself increasingly drawn to the world of health and well-being. Like I took on a side job as a personal trainer because I had some of that knowledge. I loved it. And I said, I really want to work at a place where we can do this at scale. I want to reach more people. And so what I saw was that there were corporations like Google who were willing to invest in programs that supported the health and well-being of their employees. It helped the company because you had happier, healthy employees. It helped the employees because they had better quality of life. So I said, what an amazing thing to work on. I'm going to go to business school because that's not an exercise physiology problem. That's a business problem. I'll get my degree and then hopefully I can find an opportunity. And just to be frank, I went through the business school route because I am pretty risk averse. Like I said, I have deep money fears, and this seemed like the safe route to maybe new career options. Coming out of the business school experience, I was actually, I think, the second to last person in my class to find a job. And we were going into the 2008 recession. So I was just flat out terrified. And then on the Google Jobs board, like they say, no one finds their Google job on the website. I actually did. I saw this role for fitness operations manager that would result in a 20K pay cut versus what I was making as an electrical engineer. But I said, but that's exactly what I want to do. And so I applied. Luckily, I knew someone in the organization, so they helped me navigate the process, and I got the job. And so I came into Google, this magical place where they offer all these things to take care of their employees. And I said, this is my dream job. I have found it, the job that aligns perfectly with what I want to do in the world. And in so many ways it did. And so I cranked away at the job and I worked harder and I climbed. And now 15 years later, here I am as the director of that department. Two things happened. I think one was first, I burned out. And as I burned out, I had to start asking some big questions about, okay, why did I burn out? And there I got much clearer about Google isn't inherently good or bad. It is a very large business machine with wonderful people. I will stand by that. The people have showed up so wonderfully through my entire journey. But underneath that, there's a giant business machine. And I had to start asking, how much was I building the life I wanted to live versus how much was I chasing the incentives of the business machine? What's the next promo? How do you get a good rating? What might look good to bolster your reputation, to set you all up for all of that? And I said yes to too many things there, which resulted in tacit no's to things like my family. I ended up out of alignment with my values and I burned out. And so while on leave, I had to get really way more clear about that. And that clarity is not a moment in time. That's where I started really challenging myself with questions, saying like, whatever you're doing right now, that's not clarity. It's clearly wrong. Fast forward about a year, almost a year after that, we had the massive layoff at Google. This was very painful for like so many of us, even those of us who, we got to keep our jobs. And what it made clear to me was two things. One, the people at Google, they showed up as fantastically warm, loving, caring for each other during that time as I expected them to. And so I came out of that saying, I am even more loyal to the people here in the community here because they are as wonderful under pressure as they were before the layoff. The other thing I will say is, shame on me. Like I had gotten emotionally wrapped up in this job at Google, and it's a job at a very large business machine. Like the business machine cannot love me back. I had crossed that precipice where I somehow romanticized this relationship. Like somehow Google was this organic structure that I had melded with emotionally and spiritually and all these things. It was clear that the business machine has to do what is needed for the business and is pretty dispassionate towards me. And so the question is like, do you want to love the dispassionate machine or do you want to see it for what it is, which is a awesome, wonderful career opportunity, but it is not something for me to get spiritually wrapped up in. And so coming out of that, it took me about a month where I think I dropped a lot of F-bombs in meetings, which is a new behavior for me. And then I, had some frank conversations with the leaders around me who were extremely caring and empathetic during this whole process. And the narrative I came out with was that up until now, I've defined myself as a Googler. I think the better way for me to think about this is I don't work for Google. I work for Newton Cheng. I always have. And telling myself I didn't was just a big lie because I wouldn't show up at Google if they didn't keep giving me a paycheck. So let's get real. So if you work for Newton Cheng, the only person you'll really show up for without a paycheck, including, your family and friends, then what is Google to you? And what I say now is I think Google is my lead investor. They're a key business partner. I have this mission of creating a culture of health and well-being that inspires people around the world to take care of themselves and each other. I think much of Google and what Google seeks to do is in alignment with that. Despite all of the changes and strife we're going through, it still strives so much to take care of its employees. So my offer to Google as an investor is, if you can continue investing in me, I think I can provide fantastic value here while working towards my mission. And if at some point our values and or our desired destination start to diverge, I should absolutely leave, or you should absolutely fire me, because it's no longer a good business deal. And so that is how I think about my work at Google now.
So you're thinking about Google as your lead investor, that they're investing in you and you're providing a service, doing the job for them, providing value to them for the investment they're making in you.
Yes.
Interesting. I've tried to think about Google as my biggest client, right? Like, I think for me, I want to do more workshops. I want to do more coaching and speaking and things like that. So I've thought, okay, Google's my biggest client. They probably would not agree with that characterization. It's interesting that investors are different than clients. Yeah,
I like investor because there's a little less clarity or specificity around deliverables. Where I'd say, yeah, I understand what you're asking for. I'm a human. You want to lean on me as a leader. I will deliver what I think is best for you as, my investor. And then there's certain things like performance reviews. I'm like, got it. If I take this paycheck, I got to go through these administrative things that you've asked of leaders. Totally get that. But then if I take a step back, I can be more imaginative about, how do I provide you value that is greater than what you are giving to me as an investment?
Yeah, that's a good distinction. I appreciate you making that. Investors don't tell you how to do it, right? They provide the funding and they believe in what they're asking you to do, and then you go figure out the best way to do that.
Yeah, they want a return.
They want a return on their investment, whereas a buyer-client relationship is they're buying a specific thing from you and they want you to do it in a specific way in a lot of times.
Yes.
So how has adopting this mindset of Google's your biggest investor changed your relationship with how you show up at work, how you think about that? Because I think you were describing something before about getting very caught up in the business machine, right? And trying to, I don't know. I like, for me, like right now, I feel like I'm caught up in the business machine. Has your approach and mindset around like your performance and like how others are talking and thinking about you changed?
I'll go back to my internal world a little bit, because this interacts a lot with, I think, a lot of deep fears I have. Not just really, I said I have deep money fears. Underneath there is deep fears about feeling safe and secure and validated and valued and all those things. And so I think one thing is I have to be very cautious about, am I looking to Google as a source of validation? Like, I have succeeded here again for another week. I got pats on the back. Therefore, I am good enough for another week. So I can tell the monster to shut up. And that is really deeply embedded software in my head. At least now I can name it and also recognize that's not how we want to run our lives. I continue going to therapy. I continue doing work to start to extricate that software. Doesn't come out easy, but we're in process. I think the other thing is related to a lot of the childhood bullying I went through. I have deep people-pleasing tendencies where I say, hey, I need to make you happy. I need to try to say yes to what you want in the hopes that you will like me. We will be friends. I will not be alone. I'm stating that like pretty bluntly, but that's captures a lot of the like underlying tensions. I have to be very conscious now of saying like, okay, if Google is my investor and like, yes, I interact with all of these people, And I want to be conscious of not doing things out of need for validation, but out of what creates value, both for Google and for me on my mission. I have to get better at disappointing more people. And so I am not responding to things as quickly that I don't think are critical. I am saying much more direct no's, or maybe not no's, but I am very direct about the costs of me saying yes to something, where I'd say, I can say yes to this. If I do this, I cannot do this. Here's the benefit. Here's the impact. Which of those would you prefer? And then I think with my team, trying to be pretty open and transparent about this and just be very direct about what do I think needs to get done to create value. And what I found, other than people scratching their heads saying, what's going on with Newton? Like, he's shown up different. In terms of the work, I keep getting positive reviews and even some people saying, this works better. It's clearer. Up until now, I don't see a downside yet.
That's great to hear, because I think that we can easily get caught up in the business machine and just be doing things to please the machine and can kind of lose sight of the bigger goal. Right now, I feel like I'm getting all sorts of we got to do all these things because cookies are going away, but don't talk about those things. Talk about the big thought leadership vision, right? Why should they do this? Like, yeah, that's important, but like also we got to do these things. And if we want to do these things, why don't we just do these things? And it feels like they're competing priorities in a lot of respects. And I'm just being pulled. And then I have like these things that I know are super valuable, like in bringing in visioning to my clients to get them to think bigger. I don't need to tell them like what they should care about, why they should care about these things. It's like your marketing's going to break if you don't do this. That's important, right? It should be good enough, right? But then let's connect them with their big vision for the future. I'm just here to hold space for them to do that. I've gotten really good feedback about doing this, yet I feel like sort of the more I invest in that and try to go that route, then I'm getting feedback, but you're not doing these things. And it feels like never good enough, which for someone who already doesn't feel good enough, like the monster is always saying that, like, it's just like a bit brutal.
Can I turn the tables on you for a second? You said never good enough. What do you mean by that? Do you mean that in a logical or an emotional way?
Emotional. It's like there's this judge, right? This invisible judge that's judging if what I'm doing is right, and I'm never doing it right, right? Like I couldn't explain to you what right looks like, but I just know that I'm not. I feel like I'm performing for the invisible judge sometimes.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I think for me, the invisible judge, it's if I'm coming to a snap judgment, I think someone is the judge. Oh, that person's judging me, or this person might be watching my performance. When I actually get in touch, I take a mindful moment. For me, it's like the judge is just the monster again in judge robes. There it is again. I took the monster and I superimposed them on my leader or this stakeholder who's asking me for this thing.
Yeah, that resonates for sure. And yeah, like I feel like it's my monster. And then I'm putting it on the face of my leaders. And then, just trying to like react, right? I feel like I'm in a very defensive position. And I've been having conversations about this week. And like, I think that they want me to do, and what I need to do to feel better is just be like, here's what I'm doing. Here's my plan. Here's my impact. Make sure everyone's aware, and then just do the thing. Right. I'm like 6 months into a new role that didn't exist with the new manager and new team, new clients, new everything. It's not surprising that I'm figuring it out, but the pressure that I'm feeling is like not good enough, right? Never good enough. And what I really need to decide is like, here's the impact I want to have. Here's how I want to go about using this opportunity, right? I think getting back to what you're saying before, and I think a lot of people can, pretty much everyone who works can take this into account. It's like, how do I want to show up for this opportunity and make the most of this opportunity that adds value for the employer, but also adds value for me personally? Think back to this guy I used to work with a long time ago. He was there for like a year or two, and he's like, I'm leaving. I'm like, what? You're leaving? Where are you going? Like, what are you doing? He's like, I got what I came for. I came here to understand how big company works. I understand more about how that works. and I got what I came for. I feel like I and most people don't have that clarity. So it's just like an open-ended thing.
Yeah, good for that guy.
And he's been running his own business for the last 10 years after that.
Amazing. Two important things I heard you say. Oh, one, it took me a while to figure this out while I was redeployed to different projects. And so the stakeholders and the systems around me would change. Do you think that maybe the judge feeling has to do with like your whole ecosystem of people around you changed? And I have come to very much appreciate like, hey, when I get to be with my team or I get to be with the larger leadership team around me that I've known for a while, I have this fundamental security of saying, we've built this relationship. I know if things go south or I do something that was a little off the mark, that we're okay. And I know I can lean on that. And that's all gone for you if everything changed, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting that you brought that up, because I've realized that my biggest strength is the ability to connect with people, build strong relationships, build trust pretty quickly, and then build strong relationships over time that I can rely on and lean on when inevitably something goes wrong. And that is what I'm missing right now. I don't have those relationships with the people because everyone around me is new pretty much. And I think that with my current leader, and hopefully this will come out after I've been reorged into a new leader, just putting that out there.
Statistically, that's
right. The odds are good. This person has a fundamental lack of trust with me for whatever reason. I mean, we've had interactions years ago that were less than favorable. So I know that and I feel that. I'm just missing that these people know who I am. They know the good work that I've done. And right now I'm in like a proving myself, and it seems like whatever I'm doing is not good enough.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not even like you're starting blank slate. Like you might be starting from a deficit based on
with this particular manager. Yeah. And she's also a new manager.
Okay.
I'm not the only one having problems. I didn't mean to turn this into a formal complaint.
Well, I just remembered the other thing that came up. So like this question of like, is it ever good enough? When I was really struggling with the pandemic or during the pandemic where all the work had changed, everything was volatile, I had taken on new stuff, so my stakeholders had changed. The words came to me, so I feel like the universe spoke to me, and I just Googled, how do you lead when you don't know where you're going? And there's actually a book of that title by a woman who consults with mega churches that are in decline. So let's say your mega church is in like, you've built up, you have this huge congregation, set of programs, it's wonderful. And then things just start whittling away, like times change for whatever reason. Like maybe you're not doing anything wrong, but the people are leaving. And so what she has to tell people, like let's say you are the pastor who brought them to the peak, but now it's all whittling away, or you're the new pastor who's brought in, who's supposed to turn things around. She asked them, how are you going to be okay with this if you're not the one to take this church to the promised land? Because this turnaround might take longer than your career, or the other end of this turnaround might be you are now a small church. You're a great church, but you're now a small church. You never get back to where you were. And so there's just, I think both in terms of technically what you choose to do, you have to get really clear on the end goal and then just do the behaviors that are in line with that, knowing that there's a good possibility that you will not solve the problems in your time. Like you have to hand it to the next generation. And then there's a huge emotional component of that. Hey, I got here by solving problems, by taking us to the promised land. Now you're telling me this job is to just shepherd this into whatever comes next, and what comes next might be worse than before. That feels fundamentally dissatisfying. The struggle is like when you are in something like a mature organization or some stage of life where things go up and down, like you might just be fighting reality at that point. Yeah. Like your job is to shepherd this through decline.
It's very interesting. Yeah. Like I can only show up and do what I can do, right? I can't please everybody. I can't fix every problem. I should not fight reality. I've spent enough time in my career trying to fight reality, with trying to bring ideas that they just they just didn't care about because the business machine needed different things. And so I think it's remembering like I'm my own business, right? They're an investor in me and I provide value to them, but I'm on my own track. I'm on my own mission. And how can I make the most of that, but also stay clear and true to what I'm trying to do?
Yes. Yeah. The analogy I hear a lot is, are you showing up as a mechanic or a gardener? Where the mechanic, you're like, I know how this engine works. It's this piece drives that piece, that drives that piece. I can de-embed it. I can fix the pieces. I'll solve the problem. Versus the gardener, you show up and you're like, well, I will water these plants. I will fertilize them. I'll make sure they're positioned so they get sun. And hopefully over time, this thing will grow into something strong. But it's ultimately out of my control beyond those behaviors. That's pretty much the journey we're on.
Yeah.
Is the gardener.
That's interesting. The gardener. Yeah. Very cool. So Newton, it sounds like this journey that you've been on that has helped you arrive to this new way of relating to work and thinking about your employer as an investor in your life, in you, kind of came out of your journey, burning out, going on mental health leave, doing some work on yourself. Would love to understand how that roller coaster, so to speak, has gotten you to this point.
Yeah. So when I was coming back from leave and as I was going through leave, I just felt like I was winging it. Like I'm trying to just figure out what are some things I can try or things I can even stop doing that might help me, start to heal, start to feel better. And so I did a lot of different things while on leave. The healing has continued after leave. And so again, I went on leave on January 2022. It's almost 2 years from now. And what I see now as I look back is like, okay, I felt like I was winging it, but there are actually distinct stages to this journey, at least for me. I'll lay out the 5 stages and I'll talk about them. They are retreat, reset, reconnect, reimagine, and rebuild. Now, first stage, retreat. This doesn't feel good to any high-performing professional. I had to be honest with myself. I had to retreat from the situation that was leading me to this burnout. And for me, that was stepping away from work. And so I had to make that hard decision. Reset was, as I went on leave, a lot of good friends and even Googlers, they told me like, hey, I've been on leave too. For the first 2 or 3 weeks, just don't do anything because it's going to take that much time for your brain to ramp down. And I said, you know what? Good for you, but I am an expert in health and well-being. I have studied this for 20 years, so I have my program. I'm going to heal even faster. And what I found was I just built a new healing job for myself because I filled it up with all the things, and it took even longer for my brain to cool down. And so I ended up burning about half a week to a week of causing myself anxiety with my healing program. So finally, once I put that aside and I sat quietly, after about 2 weeks, they were absolutely right. Some of that noise, like the monster got way quieter. And suddenly there was just quiet. And I could say like, okay, if the monster and all those voices, that wasn't me, what's me? And I couldn't have gotten there without this reset period. Now, the next one I call reconnect. And you can think about that as reconnecting with yourself or with others so that you can reconnect with yourself. For me, I reached out to 2 specific friends who knew me back all the way from junior high school in my 20s, before I had all these achievements, awards, like all this resume building. And I just went and hung out with them and sat with them. I spent a few days just off and on meditating with my friend in his backyard and then just talking about old times. And what that did for me was it helped me reconnect with who was this Newton person before he was in the system that was incentivizing him to do all of these things. Like, what did he want? When given the green field of all of existence, what did he want? And who did he want to be? And that was like, being with those friends was like getting in a time machine and traveling back to that body. It was quantum leap. And then coming back, I was reimagined. I came back from leave. Around that time, we had just adopted our second daughter. And so now stakes were high where I said, I cannot enter the same way that I did before. How is this going to work differently? And that's where I started to think much more about how do I work for Newton Cheng with Google as my lead investor versus I am a Googler and I'm spiritually melded with Google. And now this newest period, which I didn't really expect, was that around the end of January 2022, I started to get this itch, specifically around competitive powerlifting, where I said, okay, we've created all this space. I feel like we're healing, whether it's the monster or it's actually me. There's some fire inside me that wants to run. I want to push on something. And so I started asking myself, what's the balance of things in my life that I feel like I'm running from versus what I'm running towards? And there I picked, I want something big and audacious to run towards. So up until then, I'm a multi-time world and national champion at the masters level in powerlifting, which means 40 and over. I have gotten strong enough at that point to say, I think I got a shot at the open US championship, and that's all ages. So I got to beat the young kids. And I said, this is going to hurt, but I think I can do this. My wife wasn't completely happy with that, but I said, yeah, I don't know if it's the monster, I don't know if it's me, but I want to run. And what I found there was like, now by picking a goal that was so big and audacious that it was going to require me to change, it squeezed so much bullshit out of my life. Like the people pleasing, I was like, I can do this people pleasing behavior, but it's in the way of my goals. Nope. Oh, like a minor thing is I need to weigh all my food now because my nutrition has to be really precise. I have no qualms about holding up a salad bar line because I have a food scale. Sorry if you're mad. I don't care. Well, I do care, but I care more about my goals. And so I did that. I won the championship. And then coming out of that, I thought, okay, will my brain ramp down now? Actually, there's a lot of that bullshit I don't want back in my life. So I came out of that fundamentally changed. And now I'm asking like, well, where else can I run and squeeze more bullshit out of my life? And so that's where we're at today.
So to be clear, you did win the Open.
Yes. My fun fact, I won the day before I turned 45. My next two oldest competitors were 23. And then after that, I think there was a literal teenager.
And you beat all of these young people.
Yep.
Oh, wow. That's incredible, man. Congratulations. That is awesome to hear. And dude, I love this. I'm reading this book right now, again, for the third time. 10x is easier than 2x. Are you familiar with it?
I know the title, but I haven't actually read it.
This guy, it's based on the teachings of this guy who runs a program called Strategic Coach for kind of high-level entrepreneurs. And he says 10x is easier than 2x. When you go 2x, you just do more of the same. You just work harder. When you go 10x, you can't get to 10x. So you set yourself a 10x goal. And then that squeezed all the bullshit out that was going to keep you from getting to that. They say giving up the 80% to focus and go all in on the 20%.
Yeah.
So
maybe applied to like what you teach, should we be asking people, how might you work 10 times less?
That is the question I'm asking myself. It's not how can I work 10 times less necessarily. It's like, I want to go all in on this vision that I have, that thing that I know is that impactful, like doing these envisioning workshops. I recently had an opportunity to do it at Sundar's exec circle for 27 VPs. And it's like, this is awesome. This is what I'm meant to be doing. So how do I streamline or let go of some of this 80% that is getting in the way of me being able to do that? And that could be anything. Well, look, I'm glad that you were able to walk through that 5 steps. I think that really, I didn't know where you were going with that, but I'm glad you went there because it makes a lot of sense. I think that all of that, and you're in the rebuild phase now, right?
I am. And I'm trying with performance reviews and budgets, I'm trying not to get back to the retreat phase. I'm like, I really hope this thing isn't a circle.
It's a path, not a circle, hopefully. So Newton, let's switch gears now into what I call the Mindful Fire Final 4. You ready?
Yes, let's do it.
All right. So I guess the first question I have is related to envisioning. And I am curious as to what your vision is for the next, say, 5 years, as you pursue this mission, the business of Newton Cheng. Like, what is the vision for that?
Oh, I love this because I've been wrestling with this. As I have gotten out and done more mental health talks, and these have turned into workshops, I believe that leaders in the workplace need to be fundamentally trained differently on how we take care of each other in the workplace while getting our shared mission done. And there's so many capabilities in there that we were never taught. Things like, okay, what are some fundamental frameworks around health and well-being and how they drive performance? How do you facilitate difficult conversations that span work and life? How do you do things like active listening so people can be heard? How do you facilitate this across a group so it doesn't all go down the shitter because this is a very tense conversation, but you and your team got to align on ways of working so you can all take care of each other? And then how you systematized all of this. And so those are the things I'm trying to solve with some of the workshops I'm doing. I would like in 5 years for, if I dream big, I'm like, I would love this to be some sort of credentialed program I could roll out to places like business schools and or corporations.
Like with trained facilitators that you've trained and certified so that they can go and do it far and wide.
Yes.
That's very interesting. I love the vision. I love it. All right. The second question is, what piece of advice would you give to someone early on their path to financial independence?
Two things. One is so much of the work that I see the tools that you provided and then other people from the FIRE movement around calculators on what do you actually need in order to feel like you are retired and now you're just working by choice. Do that work, get clear on your math. That's one thing. Two, start checking yourself now, because I have my calculator. It looks pretty good. I still have these deep money fears. That was my aha of like, hey, wait a minute, logically, I'm doing great. Why am I still anxious about this? Start looking into that now. I wish I had done that way back before of like, okay, what are the underlying voices that are telling me I'm not good enough and I'm trying to make more money to explain why that's wrong? If I could get rid of that and just focus on my calculator, I think I'd get there faster.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's so much there. And yeah, we explore a lot of that on this podcast because it's so important, right? Like the money piece is one important, but not that it's important, but it's not the only piece. And it's, if you figure it out and you get to the goal and you haven't done the work on the mental and spiritual and emotional and money fears and all that, doesn't really matter. You're just going to say, I don't have enough still.
Yes.
So that's something I've been thinking about. The third question is, what piece of advice would you give to someone getting started with meditation and or mindfulness?
I think the thing that I got wrong with it is if I don't feel peace and clarity that I'm doing it wrong. And since then, I treat it more like jogging, where I'm like, I hate jogging. But there's a correct way to do it, and you need to do it consistently. And over time, you will have benefit. And so once I reoriented my mindset around that and said, okay, I understand why you got to do 30-day meditation challenges, all that stuff. Once I stuck with it enough, your brain does start to quiet down. Or you learn to separate, okay, those are my thoughts. They're not me. And so you can check yourself in the moment and keep yourself from going down things like anxiety spirals, which I still struggle with, but it's getting better. It's like jogging. It's not like an instant peace pill.
Very good. Yeah, great advice. I like that metaphor. And the last question, Newton, is how can people connect with you online, learn more about your workshops and all the things that you're building as the business of Newton Cheng?
3 places. Go to newtoncheng.com, and Cheng is spelled Cheng. You can find me on LinkedIn, and then you can find me on Instagram under the handle Newton Cheng, all one word. And so on LinkedIn, I post much more about mental health in the workplace. On Instagram, I speak more to my audience there, which is a lot of powerlifting, but I talk about the intersections of that with the other aspects of life and work and the mental health journey.
Wonderful. Well, I'll link all of that up in the show notes and people can connect with you there. Highly recommend following him on LinkedIn. I've learned a lot and been inspired by your journey. And thank you so much for being here today, Newton. It's been a pleasure to get to know you a little bit and have a very real conversation, which I know people are going to get a lot out of. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Adam. Thank you for who you are, what you do. I have loved your stuff as well.
Thanks for joining me on today's episode of the Mindful Fire podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, I invite you to hit subscribe wherever you're listening to this. This just lets the platforms know you're getting value from the episodes and you want to be here when I release additional content. If you're ready to start your Mindful Fire journey, go to mindfulfire.org/start and download my free envisioning guide. In just 10 minutes, this guide will help you craft a clear and inspiring vision for your life. Again, you can download it for free at mindfulfire.org/start. Thanks again, and I'll catch you next time on the Mindful Fire Podcast.